All right, welcome everyone. A couple of logistics before we get started. If you have questions during the presentation, please put your questions in the chat feature as they arise and we will moderate them at an appropriate time. This session is being recorded for those that need to view it at a later time. The recording will be sent to all who have registered tomorrow. We ask that those that did not attend the live session view the recording ahead of the May 17th meeting. If you need any technical assistance throughout the session, please use the chat feature to contact Carrie Lamb or call her at 802-477-3601, and I'll make sure to put that number in the chat as well. This training will take part in two parts. This 1 hour pre-webinar and the in-person event held at the Hilton Lake Champlain on Wednesday, May 17th from 12:30 p.m. to 7:30 p.m. These two parts satisfy the statutory requirements set forth in 16 VSA 561, which requires that at least annually the chairs of each school board within a supervisory union, the chair of the supervisory union board, and the superintendent shall jointly participate in at least 8 hours of professional training that at minimum addresses educational leadership, roles and responsibilities, open meeting law, public records, collective bargaining, and education funding. We have invited board officers and superintendents to attend this two-part training. Board officers play an important leadership role in board activity and may aspire to the board chair role at a later date. Specifically in this two-part training, participants will, and I'll ask Susan to go to the learning outcomes, explore key elements of a successful board chair superintendent relationship, develop shared strategies for working well together and developing the board superintendent team, explore strategies in effective school board meeting management, build understanding of funding changes in upcoming annual budgets, review Vermont's open meeting law and public records request law, and apply that review to case scenarios. Tonight's webinar agenda will focus primarily on the first learning objective. Certificates of attendance will be issued at the conclusion of the in-person session on May 17th. If you have any logistical questions, please feel free to put those in the chat. And with that, I'm going to ask Susan Holson to surface some key strategies for highly effective board, chair, and superintendent teams. Thanks, Susan.
Thanks, Chelsea. It's kind of strange and wonderful to be back here. And so for those of you whom I know, thank you for letting me back in. You may know VSBA has a personnel gap at the moment. And so Sue pulled me out of retirement to ask me to help out for this month. So thanks for putting up with me. And I'm back, but just for a little while. So as Chelsea said, we're going to talk about strategies for effective teams today. And you're all professionals. None of this is brand new, earth-shattering stuff. It's just packaged a little bit differently than you may have seen it before. And hopefully it'll spark some new line of thinking for you and your partners, your teammates in your district. And when I am talking about partners and teammates, certainly in this context, we're talking about board leadership and superintendents together, because it's really together that you make your school districts operate and operate well. So characteristics for high-performing boards are pretty well outlined, and there's been quite a lot of research done about this. Most of what we're going to talk about today comes from a publication put out by the National School Boards Association called 8 Characteristics of Highly Effective Boards by Chuck, I'm going to brutalize his last name, Dervarix and Eileen O'Brien. So some of you may even be familiar with this source material, but successful boards that have high performing districts and are managing to really promote that high performance have a really well-defined goal setting and monitoring process. They know how to set goals. They know to involve all of the stakeholders in the goal setting process. And then they also have means in place in their regular schedules and their regular process to be able to monitor the progress towards the goals and make sure you're on the right track. Now, using data to justify those decisions means you have to own up to the fact when the data is giving you information that you're not progressing and that the initiatives have not yet taken hold, or maybe they need to be tweaked a little bit and revised as you go along. So just because you've established goals and you've got a strategy for meeting them doesn't mean it's the one and only strategy. And if you're not seeing that progress that you want, obviously you need to change something. Another thing that they've been identified in successful boards is that board members really know their district well. And by that, I don't mean they know every nook and cranny of each school building, but rather they're really conversant about the policy manual and the way that the school uses the policies in practice, as well as understanding the financial makeup of the district, the budget process, the current budget, the future budget, and how the communities are accepting the initiatives. Because if the communities are involved in goal setting, and by communities, I mean all your stakeholder groups, including your staff, if you've got the whole team involved in setting those goals, the board members are leading that. And so they need to know the district as well or better than everybody else. And finally, and the part we're going to focus on today really is the working relationship between boards and superintendents. There has to be respect. There has to be collegiality. You are a team. And you also need to share a commitment to the student's success. And deep down at the heart of it all, it comes down to trust. This is a rubric. I'm not going to take time to go through it. You'll get a packet with all of the slides after the fact. This is adapted from 5 dysfunctions of a team, the effective team correlates. And the 5 parameters that they use to determine the success of a team, the effectiveness of the team, are, as you can see in the left-hand column: trust, communication, commitment, accountability, and results. And if you look through the rubric definitions, trust is measured by members' own comfort in discussing their own mistakes and weaknesses. In other words, can I allow myself to look vulnerable and trust that I will still have the respect of the group and I can still participate comfortably? Communication in this context stresses the members' comfort in participating in open and frank discussions of their ideas, no matter how unpopular they may seem, no matter how innovative they may be. It's owning them, having the comfort to be able to discuss them and not feeling overpowered or intimidated. Commitment here talks about the board members' engagement with an acceptance of the board decisions and actions. I know before I left the SBA, we were starting to see factions of boards publicly undermining a past vote of a board. And that's where things really start to fall apart. I mean, if you get to that point, the cracks are no longer just superficial, right? They're driving deep down. And so you want to nip that in the bud before it starts. Accountability stresses the importance of the board's well-being. So do all board members, and in this context, the administrators, all have the board's best interest at heart? So the board is an entity unto itself. It is made up of however many elected board members you have. No one board member has any particular power or authority, but as a unit, the board does. And so having individual board members respecting the vitality and the solidarity of a district really strengthens the board's ability to be effective. And finally, we're talking about team building here. We're not talking about results in terms of measuring student results, which is also, of course, an important part of the job. But here, in terms of making the team successful, the results are measured by how much members can put the board's goals in context ahead of their own needs, ahead of their own agenda item. So there's a lot of give and take here, and compromise and collaboration. And anybody who understands that and encourages that is building for strength. So the characteristics of effective boards that are outlined in this study are that everybody has high expectations for student achievement and quality instruction, with clearly defined goals and measurable goals, strong shared beliefs and values about what's possible for students and their ability to learn, meaning that the system can teach them at all levels. Accountability, this word keeps coming up and up and up. And I saw a great reminder in one of the source materials. When we talk about accountability, often I think we sort of lapse into either taking ownership of something or blaming somebody else for it. And that's the notion of accountability. But really down at the root, the accountability is just being accountable, being able to address all of the moving pieces that boards manage. So that accountability always has to keep focused on policies. That's the board's touch, right? Policies to improve student achievement, and then leave the operations to the administrative team. And I know that's one of the areas where our local boards struggle, because how do you know everything about your system and not touch the operations? Well, when I said earlier, knowing your system inside and out, it's from the board's perspective, from that, eagle's nest view. Collaboration with staff and community are critically important, and the staff involvement of board members, and that's a tricky situation because communications really need to go through the superintendent. And I realize in some of the SUs, the boards have relationships directly with the building principals, and that's a different structure. But to make sure that the board hears from staff as a whole, as an aggregate, is really important also. So whether it's in the form of staff presentations to the board on what they're working on and which initiatives are moving forward at board meetings, or it's having a survey that goes out through administration, not around administration, but through them, so that the staff can also be involved in the goal setting and planning. I mentioned data before. One of the things that's always an interesting challenge is board members, of course, don't need to have any special particular credentials other than living in the community. And so people come to the board with all different levels of comfort with different aspects of board work. For some, data analysis is what they spend their waking hours on. And for others, it's pretty far removed, and they haven't really been looking at much of that since high school. And so helping them through, and that again is a leadership piece, both administration and board leadership, helping members understand the data that's presented to them so that they can be looking at it and interpreting it is really important. Plopping it down in front of them and assuming that they know what to do with it may not be the answer. And the other piece that we tend to forget about when we're looking at data is even negative data provides really important information. So administrators, please don't shy away from sharing negative data with the board. it's their responsibility too. They're accountable to the communities too. And so look at that negative data, understand what it's telling you, and then strategize about ways to fix it rather than just sweeping it under the rug. And finally, aligning resources to meet the district goals should be implicit in the budgeting process. But we all know that when comes time for the budget, we not only have to look at that, but also at the total nut and what it is we're asking of our communities. If the ask is aligned with specific initiatives designed to achieve or address some of the goals that the board has established in conjunction with the community, then the budget sell is easy, because people have been involved in understanding what those goals are and understand that it's a process to achieving them. Unity in leadership is also really important. And that's where the board chair and the superintendent can really form a bond, a pair, a team. And you're not second guessing each other because everybody's got their own job. And it's certainly the superintendent and the board chair have different lanes to travel in, but the objectives are the same. The goals, the big goals are the same, and everybody is buying into that. So having that understanding of we're all in this together, even though we're not sitting side by side working through it, is another valuable understanding. And finally, participation. You want your boards to be able to work together, both with administration and as a unit, as in the board, participating and sharing in training for board members with and without administration, depending on the circumstances, not only advances understanding, but it also builds shared knowledge and shared values and strengthens the commitments that all of the parties are making to education in your community. So, here's the flip side, right? Danger ahead. If board members don't know what the school initiatives are, test scores have been sort of holding their own or dropping off a little bit, and your community's asking all kinds of questions, and he's like, oh, I don't know, they're taking care of it, is an insufficient answer, because the community holds boards accountable. Also, be careful about blaming, oh, well, this district, no, the parents have never been involved here. We have a high poverty rate, transportation's a problem. We can't get the parents involved. That's not productive. That may be a statement of where you are, but it's not the reason students are failing. It's the reason they have more challenges, perhaps, but those challenges need to be addressed. And finally, a big crash course is when boards try to do the administration's job, it never works well. It never is productive for students. When boards get too deeply involved in administration and specifically operations, they're losing sight of the big picture. And that's the part that the board is really charged with having and holding and owning. So just breaking down a little further, when boards and administrative teams work together and collaborate together, both with the larger staff groups and the larger community groups, you build trust. And without that trust, you really struggle. So however you can increase trust, it may be a retreat where you all go and do a ropes course together, or one of those corporate kinds of trust building things. But shared knowledge builds trust. So the more you do together as a group, the more you begin to get to know each other. And then your disagreements aren't personal. Your disagreements are philosophical or practical, but you're all still reminded of the fact that you're looking for the same outcomes. My slides are doing some very funky things, and I notice some words aren't showing up, so I apologize for that. I'm not quite sure what's going on there. And, you know, we've talked about collaboration till we're blue in the face. So the superintendent is the primary source of information. But the boards also get information from other members of the administrative team at board meetings in appropriately planned and channeled ways. The communication structure is critical, and that's internal, external, community within the buildings. And here's an objection that I hear frequently from board members, especially newer board members, that they don't seem to know what's going on as much as everybody else does, and particularly the board chair. Well, it's true. Board chairs and superintendents generally have more communication between them than other board members, but it is incumbent on the board chair to make sure that the whole board is apprised of the salient parts of those discussions. Here's a comment from the study that was pretty interesting, I thought. This is from a low achieving district. This goes back to what I was saying before. When an individual board member's interests and expectations detract from board adopted achievement and instructional goals, they are not contributing to district success, but in fact may be working in opposition to that end. So understanding the big picture, the greater good, is always underlying everything. And as a board chair, it's incumbent on you to lay that foundation for at all your meetings, for all of the work that you're doing. I love the Rockettes, so forgive this photo in the background there, but you are a united team. I don't know how else to say it. I know I'm beating this one over the head here, because it's always give and take with the superintendent and his or her team, and also the boards. Everybody's working in the same general direction. How do you get there? Well, learning together, especially outside your normal interactions, is bonding. So help your new board members understand what's going on. The board chairs and superintendents have some sort of local district orientation that you can provide to catch them up on the hot issues that you're talking about in March, April, May, when your new board members are seated. What are the discussions that you've been having short term? What were the big initiatives that you established at last year's retreat? Help them get set up. I met with a bunch of new board members on Monday, and I said, okay, how many of you been to meetings so far? Most of them had been. And most of them were like deers in headlights. You know, it's a lot to come at once. If you're a board chair, you may have been in a position of leadership, or at least been on your board for a long time, and you may not remember how disorienting that feeling can be when you first show up. So we really encourage you to send your new board members to the SBA for our overview training of what governance is and what the job of a school board is. But that's got to be complemented with your local training on what your issues are and what you're facing and what you're working on right now. So it's that combination, it's the double thing. We welcome all of you to any of the new board member stuff. We always love the perspective of more seasoned veterans, what they have to share with the new board members.
Susan, we have a question in the chat about training.
Yeah.
Abigail asked, how do you balance high quality training and open meeting laws? For example, an inherent bias training, which is not well suited to open meetings.
Board meetings are required, as you know, to be open meetings. That does not mean that that portion of the meeting must contain public comment. If you've got a workshop session in implicit bias for the board, you should go ahead with that session. You may have an audience, they're not involved. You don't have to be taking their questions at that time. And maybe they learn something too. There are exceptions in open meeting law for work meetings, work sessions. I don't want to get too deep into that. Next week, we actually have the Secretary of State and the Deputy Secretary of State coming to the meeting in Burlington to talk about open meeting law. And I would really encourage you to hold on to that question for them, because you'll get the full answer on that question. So this should, yeah, sure. This should surprise nobody, but high achieving districts have staff members who identified clear goals for improvement, described how staff development supported the goals, and how they were monitoring based on data about student learning, right? That's the high expectations. Low achieving districts, there was little evidence of a pervasive focus on school renewal at any level, and it wasn't present at the board level either. So basically, there were no expectations or low expectations. Oh, there it is. I think, we sort of have a gut about this stuff. And sometimes just seeing it in organized, it starts to make more sense. Shared beliefs and values. This is another one. And this is something I know a lot of us are confronting right around now. It's really important, and I encourage this should happen either at your reorganization meetings or during summer retreat, where you really clearly list what your shared beliefs and values are as a community, and read those regularly, at least annually, and make sure they're still, read them aloud at your meeting, at least annually, and make sure that they're still appropriate and that they still capture the essence of the district and the community and the goals that you have for your kids. Here's a board member comment from a high achieving district, and this is, again, will surprise no one. Sometimes people say poor students have limits. I say all kids have limits. I believe we have not reached the limits of any of the kids in our system. And the low achieving district comment on this is, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make them drink. It applies to both students and staff. So if your staff isn't motivated to move forward on your goals, address that problem. The problem then isn't that the goals are wrong. The problem is the whole team isn't working and pulling in the same direction. So with accountability, it goes back to that blaming versus owning. High achieving districts really focus on student achievement, not the day-to-day stuff, but the big picture stuff, establishing a vision supported by policies to target student achievement. And everything we do is based on what's best for the children, period. Whether you're dealing with administrative issue, a student issue, what's best for the children. The superintendent may say, these are the results we want to see. The board can tell the superintendent, these are the results we want to see. You figure out how to get these results. So the strategy is up to you. The execution is up to you. You are the CEO, but these are the goals. And then everybody's accountable. The board's accountable for the goals, and the system is accountable for achieving them. Talked about data. We talk about data a lot. You know, there are a lot of different bits of hard data that we can use to help understand the success of the district, but and everybody always falls back on test scores, and test scores aren't a good measure of how a district is doing. Of course, they're not when they're the only thing you're looking at, but they are, in fact, an important piece of data, along with things like graduation rates and staff retention rates. If you're having staff retention problems, then your whole district is unstable, and maybe you need to get to the crux of that problem first. So use all the data, qualitative as well as quantitative. So when you have groups of staff and or students coming to your board presenting on initiatives or presenting portfolios, or however it is the board chair has organized that meeting, that's all data for you. Those are all data points. Even though they're harder to quantify, you need to keep them alive. Resource allocation really is at the heart of the board's job, right? You set the goals, and then you need to make sure that there are adequate resources in place for achieving them. And part of that is professional development for all school personnel and for boards in order to understand what that connection is between the resources needed and the initiatives that are in place or proposed. So remembering that resources is not just money, it's also time and people. Those things need to be analyzed at each level to make sure that the funding and other resource allocations are appropriate for achieving the goal. If you've got a, if you establish a goal that you want your third graders all reading at a satisfactory level, and you've got 100%, you want 100% of students at satisfactory level, that there are going to be some students who will need much more intensive instruction, and you need to have money and time and appropriately trained people available to those students to make that happen, right? So all of those things are a little push and pull, a little give and take, all part of the team dynamics between the superintendent, and I use that term, I know you are embodied in one person, but you also have an internal team, your leadership team. Different people have different terms for it, but you know who we mean, right? Your curriculum people and your student services support and your inner sanctum, your principals. But instead of me continuing on this level, let's switch our thinking here and put this into practice a little bit more. Chelsea, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Susan. And for those listening to the recording, I just want to articulate that we have had some discussion in the chat about retreats and open meeting law, or trainings in open meeting law. And we have the Secretary of State coming in next week. And I have recorded that as a question to ask that office. And with that, we are going to hear from Superintendent Megan Roy and Board Chair Flor Diaz-Smith to demonstrate what the activity or the discussion that you all will be having in breakout sessions at the at around 3:40 or 3:45, whenever we get to it. So with that, Welcome, Megan and Floor. Thank you for being here. Thus far in your partnership as board chair and superintendent, what are some strategies that have been successful for you as a team?
Thanks, Chelsea. Thanks, Susan, for all of that. I'll start. I'm Megan Roy. I'm the superintendent, and I'm very fortunate to work with Flora Diaz-Smith as our board chair. And I guess we'll just start. We talked a little bit about the structural part of what makes our team successful, because there's also a pretty big component of relationship building and trust and kind of establishing that. But some of the things really early on that have helped be successful. This is my first year in the district, finishing out my first year. So for me, coming into existing structures or building structures where they didn't exist was pretty important. And that was both true of our connection as chair and superintendent, but also the full board. So the easy ones are, we have a standing weekly meeting that really never changes. And then pretty near constant communication outside of that, so that we have a structured and unstructured way of mostly communicating. And sometimes what we're communicating around is planning agendas, or this is a piece of information that I've learned that I need to convey to Floor, or actually sometimes talking through what's the next right audience for whatever it is I have to share. Is this something our steering committee should be aware of? Is this something for the finance committee? Is this something for the full board? And I would say that if we didn't have that structure of meetings to be able to hold that, it would be really hard to do work, especially as a new person coming into the system, where there's a lot of historical knowledge of the communities and how the board has functioned that I won't have as a new superintendent. So I don't know if you wanted to.
Sure. Should I mute again?
Maybe we.
Okay.
Only one of you should have your mic on at once if you're in the same room.
Chelsea and everybody, we're in the same room because we both have.
And you'll have to mute your screen as well when you're not talking, so that you don't get an echo of each other talking.
Okay, can you hear us okay without the echo now? I think we made it work. Okay, so just to follow up in what Megan was saying, it is our first year together, and we are still pinching ourselves of how lucky we got, and it's working out great. And I think part of, not to just sort of continue to say the same things she said, what has worked out great is that openness in communication from both of us, being honest about what we know and we don't know, and not being worried about stepping on each other's toes. So just asking the questions, right? Like when we don't know, being open in that communication and building on that trust has been really important. I remember one of the questions that Megan asked when she was interviewing was like, how would it feel if it's going right? And I said, well, it just feel right. It would just feel, calm, and that you can be open and be honest and trust each other. And that's exactly how it feels a year later. So I would say that having systems in place, creating a work calendar through aligning our goals with the district. Our district had goals in the past, and we have had a calendar. Now we just have a dedicated calendar. We know what is going on as we build our agendas, and staying focused on what is best for kids. I think having those mutual agreements across has helped a lot, and the collaboration through the leadership team, Megan, and the board in being having a growth mindset and learning together. Right, last year we invested a lot of time in professional development for the board, and with Phil Gore, who was working before and then at BSBA, and just understanding how are the kids doing, right? Being able to articulate that and aligning our priorities in our education quality committee has been great. And what else am I missing on that? Building a team and being accountable to each other. And it's not always easy to communicate with all board members, right? So as a chair, and I know that there's many in it sometimes feels like very isolating to be a chair, and sometimes I get calls from other chairs across the state, and that is really fun. We have the SBA has a chair every so often, Sandra can correct me, or Susan, but at least once a month.
6
right?
weeks, every 6 weeks.
Yeah, every 6 weeks. Okay. So that also helps learning from each other. So those are the things that have been successful, that the team building especially, and focusing on what's best for kids.
Yeah, I would add two things related to success in general, and this may just be, I guess it's just an advantage. So, our system is also in the process of building our governance structures and how we want to operate together as a board. And in some ways, that's a nice time as a new superintendent in the system to enter that conversation, because there aren't a lot of structures that existed before. But what that also means is we have to rely on that chair and superintendent collaboration even more, because sometimes, at least for me, I'm entering, okay, how does the board typically want to handle this? And the answer might be, well, we don't have a structure, so what do we want that structure to be? And then we can have a conversation about how do we channel the board toward whatever that issue is that they're working on. Do that within a structure that's going to get us closer to where we want to be. Some districts aren't in the process of renorming and re-understanding who they are, so that may be a little bit unique to us. But for me, that's sort of the, and I won't segue to the question if we're not ready, Chelsea, but that's an area of growth that really isn't because it hasn't worked in terms of our chair and superintendent team, but it's just sort of the natural cycle of where we are, is having spent a year building trust, understanding that we can talk through issues, and I can come to Flora and say, I don't really know where we should go with this. Is this something that should be just between you and I? Is this something that we should bring to which circle? I trust that I can ask that question. And so now we are at the point where we get to take all of that and bring it to the next circle out in terms of building structures. So for me, that's the next area of growth, I think, for our team.
Yeah, I don't have to ask the question because you segued so nicely right in. So Flora, why don't you wrap up with what your area of growth for your board chair superintendent team is, and then we'll get people into breakout rooms.
So I think for us as a board is that providing more clarity, more often providing more clarity, and especially because we're a district that our population is declining, that we are having to really examine through our strategic planning the next areas of, are we best structured to serve our kids in the structure that we have right now? So helping channel that clarity from the board and communicating the important parts to the board, I think is to the board and back to Megan and to her team. So being better at providing clarity of what the board exactly is asking for.
Thank you very much, Flora and Megan, for kind of demonstrating what the conversations will look like in the breakout rooms. We're going to provide all of you with an opportunity to share your own successes and areas of growth with colleagues from around the state. We are about to put you into breakout rooms of about 4 people. Please note that you will not necessarily be with your board officers or superintendent from your district. You will see a small window pop up on your screen inviting you into your pre-assigned room. We will leave the breakout rooms open for about 6 to 8 minutes, allowing for about 2 minutes for each person to share their responses to the questions on the screen, which we will also put into the chat. Again, what has been successful about your board superintendent team, and what is an area of growth for your board chair and superintendent team? So you will see a breakout room in just a second. All right. All right. We hope that you had some relatively brief but rich discussions, and there will be more opportunities for connections with colleagues at our in-person event next week. If you talked about an idea that you think is worth sharing about board superintendent relationships, superintendent relationships, please feel free to post it in the chat for your colleagues to see. Before we conclude, we would like you all to complete a final exit survey to help inform some of the networking content that we will have for next week's session. You can access the survey by clicking on the link that I am about to enter into the chat. Or you can use the QR code to access the survey on your mobile device. Once you have completed the survey, the session is completed, and we look forward to seeing you all next week at 12:30 p.m. at the beautiful Hilton Lake Champlain.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.